The lunar diplomatic station glimmered like a silver crown in the inky blackness of space, its spinning rings casting shadows on the cratered lunar surface. Inside the station's grand conference hall, Ethan Grayson stood at attention, his troops in stark contrast to the vibrant array of alien diplomats surrounding him. Beside him was General Mitchell, whose weathered face bore a look of concern. "You're volunteering to join the wall. The same mission that killed 3 previous candidates?" General Mitchell asked. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "Someone has to bridge the gap. Vora is too powerful to ignore," the general noted. "And you believe you're the right person for this?" "My record speaks for itself," Ethan said confidently. 12 successful first contact missions, including the Centurion crisis. "I understand alien psychology better than most." The general pointed to a hologram displaying a Vora warrior. "They're twice your size, with telepathic powers we barely comprehend. They show no real interest in human contact." Ethan studied the towering figure on the display. "Which is why we need to try harder, sir. The galaxy is changing and we need allies, not just distant neighbors." Before the general could respond, the main dock door slid open, revealing an imposing figure. A Vora warrior, her blue skin glowing ethereally under the station's artificial lights. Her ceremonial armor gleamed with intricate symbols, marking her status. The assembled diplomats quieted, captivated by her entrance. Ethan felt his mouth go dry. "So, this is Uriella." When it was Ethan's turn to meet her, he stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Welcome to the Lunar Diplomatic Station," he said in carefully practiced Vora language. "I'm Captain Ethan Grayson." Uriella's voice had a musical quality, even through the translator. "You're smaller than expected." A nervous chuckle came from the crowd, but Ethan didn't flinch. "Good things come in small packages, as we say on Earth," he replied, managing a smile. Her eyes narrowed, though a hint of amusement flickered. "You speak our language well, human. I had 3 months to prepare, though I'm sure my accent is terrible." "It will suffice," she replied, with a trace of humor. "Let's see if your other preparations hold up." As the evening's diplomatic reception continued, Ethan noticed Uriella watching him thoughtfully, her gaze more analytical than hostile. Later at dinner, they found themselves seated opposite each other at a table designed to accommodate various species' needs. "Why did you volunteer for this mission?" Uriella asked, holding her delicate cutlery with surprising ease. "Honest answer or diplomatic one?" he replied. "Honest," she said, her expression sharpening with interest. "Everyone else was too scared to try," he admitted. "And yes, I am afraid. But fear can be useful when it doesn't control you." She tilted her head, studying him intently. "You are unexpected, Captain Grayson." "Call me Ethan," he replied. "If we're trying to connect, we might as well start with names." "Connection is not yet assured," she warned. "You must prove worthy first." Before he could respond, an alarm blared throughout the station. Red lights flashed and a voice announced, "Security breach in Sector 7. Ethan immediately sprang into action, his military training kicking in. He knew the layout well and gestured to Uriella. "Sector 7 is near the power core. We can take a maintenance corridor. It'll be faster." She eyed the narrow tunnel with skepticism. "You expect me to crawl?" "I expect you to help stop terrorists from blowing up the station." For a brief moment, she studied him, then nodded. "Lead the way, human." At the tunnel's exit, they encountered 3 intruders attempting to breach the power core's defenses. Ethan signaled for Uriella to stay back as he assessed the situation. "There are 3, he whispered. "We need to." But Uriella stepped forward, launching a swift, brutal attack. Ethan quickly followed her lead, their combined skills dispatching the attackers in moments. Afterward, they stood amidst the unconscious bodies, both breathing heavily. "Your combat skills are acceptable," Uriella noted, a hint of respect in her voice. "High praise," Ethan replied with a smirk, wiping blood from his lip. "Though we might need to work on subtlety." Subtlety is overrated, she said, her gaze locking onto his. You anticipated my actions and adapted your strategy accordingly. Why? Because that's how you connect. By working with differences, not fighting them. She considered this, then reached out to touch his injured lip with surprising gentleness. You may not be entirely unqualified. The station security team arrived, momentarily interrupting them. Later, as the diplomatic reception resumed on high alert, Ariella approached him once more. I have decided, she announced, to proceed with the connection trials. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What changed your mind? You've shown courage, intelligence, and resilience, all valued traits. Her gaze held his. Even if you're still rather small, I prefer to think of it as efficiently sized. A low, almost musical laugh escaped her. We begin tomorrow. As she walked away, Ethan couldn't help but smile. It was a beginning, and in diplomacy, sometimes that was all one needed. General Mitchell appeared at his side. Well, Captain, it seems you made a good impression. Yes, sir, Ethan replied, watching Ariella go. But the real challenge is just beginning. Remember your mission, Captain, the General advised. The future of human Vora relations may rest on it. ChatGPT could cause errors. Envisages to verify less information's importance. Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were already on tomorrow's trials, and the fascinating warrior, he would be facing them with something told him. This mission would be unlike anything in his extensive experience, and he couldn't wait to begin dawn on the lunar diplomatic station, bringing the artificial glow of simulated sunlight streaming through the reinforced windows of the training facility. Ethan arrived early, finding Ariella already there, her massive form moving through a series of fluid combat stances that seemed to defy her size. You're early, she noted without breaking her routine. I couldn't sleep. Ethan admitted removing his jacket and thought I might as well get started. Ariella completed her sequence before turning to face him. The connection ritual requires more than physical preparation. Small warrior, I know mental synchronization, emotional resonance, and he paused searching for the right Valoran term. Spiritual alignment, you've studied our texts. Well, she approached her movement deliberately slow, but reading is not understanding without warning. Her mind brushed against a sensation like static electricity across his consciousness. Ethan staggered, unprepared for the intensity. Your mental barriers are strong, she observed, but rigid. They must be flexible, like water. That would be easier if you'd warned me before doing that. Ethan gasped, steadying himself, a slight smile curving her lips. Enemies do not warn before they strike. Neither will I. Thus began their training routine each morning, which started with physical conditioning, a brutal combination of human military exercises. In the Valerian warrior disciplines, despite their size difference, Ethan held his own, his agility complementing her raw strength. Your movements are efficient, Ariella commented one morning watching him complete a complex maneuver like a killing stroke disguised as a caress. Was that a compliment or a criticism? An observation? Her purple eyes lingered on him. You hide much beneath your surface. Ethan Grayson. The afternoon sessions focused on mental exercises, which proved far more challenging. Ethan's military training had taught him to fortify his mind now. He had to learn to open it. Relax, Ariella instructed, her massive hands hovering near his temples. Your thoughts are, like clenched fists, open them easier said than done. Ethan muttered, trying to ignore how her proximity affected him. In my line of work, mental barriers keep you alive, and in this work they will kill your voice. Softened trust must begin somewhere. Slowly, day by day, they made progress. Ethan learned to recognize the unique signature of Ariel's mental presence, like distant thunder on a summer night. She in turn began to understand human concepts of personal space, though she found them amusing. Your species is so concerned with invisible boundaries, she remarked during a break. Yet you willingly enter each other's minds through what you call small talk, speaking of which Ethan grinned. Why did the human cross? The galaxy Ariella's expression showed familiar exasperation. Another of your jokes. To get to the other side of the universe. That is not funny. The delivery needs work, he admitted, but you're smiling. I am not. You are just a little. Their banter was interrupted by the arrival of Ambassador Chun, one of the human diplomatic corps. His face was tight with concern. Captain Grayson, a moment of your time. Ethan exchanged glances with Ariella before following Chun to a corner of the training room. There's opposition growing to this project. Chun whispered, both human and Vora. Some believe the connection ritual will give the Vora too much influence over human affairs, or humans too much influence over the Vora, Ethan concluded. Hence the recent security breach. Just watch your back, Captain. As Chun left, Ethan noticed Ariella's focused expression. You heard all that, didn't you? My hearing is superior to humans. She confirmed, as is my ability to sense deception. The ambassador speaks truth, but not all of it. That evening, during their cool-down exercises, Ethan felt a shift in their mental connection. Instead of the usual controlled exchange, he caught glimpses of Ariella's memories, her training as a warrior, the weight of her people's expectations, and something else concerning him. The connection broke abruptly. Ariella stepped back, her expression guarded. That was unexpected. Ethan said carefully, You saw some. Did you see anything from me? She nodded slowly at your courage, your loneliness, and your hesitated attraction. The word hung between them like a challenge. Ethan met her gaze steadily. Does that bother you? It should she move closer, her massive form casting him in shadow. You are a small, fragile alien, but you are also her hand reaching out fingers, stopping just short of touching his face. The moment was shattered by alarms, not the station security system. This time, but proximity warnings from the training room itself. Multiple armed figures emerged from concealed panels in the walls. Ethan and Ariella moved in perfect sync, their recent training paying off. She provided cover while he was disabled. The nearest attacker then used her strength to launch him toward another. Their minds touched briefly during the fight, allowing them to coordinate without words. When station security arrived, they found 6 unconscious assassins and Ethan and Ariella standing back to back, both breathing heavily. That's one way to test our connection. Ariella's laugh rumbled through her chest. You just now. Would you prefer? I panicked. Her hand found his shoulder, engulfing its number. I prefer you exactly as you are. The aftermath brought increased security and scrutiny. Investigation revealed the assassins were hired by a coalition of conservative factions from both species. The Connection Ritual Project was now under threat of cancellation in their private training room. Ethan and Ariella faced each other across the mat. They fear what we might become, Ariella said softly. What might we become? She reached out this time, allowing her fingers to brush his cheek. The touch sent sparks through their growing mental link. Something new, something neither of our peoples has seen before. Is that what you want? Ethan asked, leaning slightly into her touch. What I want is she drew him closer until he had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact, which may not align with my duties and my experience, and he smiled the best things. Rarely does their training continue with new intensity. The physical danger had sparked something deeper in their connection during combat simulations. Their minds merged more freely, sharing not just thoughts but emotions and desires. Your mind tastes like starlight, Ariella commented during one. Such merger didn't know minds had tastes, and Ethan managed to still adjust to the intensity of their connection. Much about us remains unknown to each other. Her mental presence caressed his consciousness. Perhaps that is part of the attraction, that the breakthrough came during a particularly challenging simulation, surrounded by holographic enemies. They moved as one, her strength and his agility perfectly balanced. Their minds merged completely. For a brief moment, and in that instant, they understood each other fully. Ethan saw Ariella's childhood in her home world, and felt the pressure of being chosen, as her people's representative experienced her growing fascination with him. She in turn witnessed his lonely path through military service, his desire to bridge the gap between their species, and the depth of his feelings. For her, when they emerged from the connection, both were shaken, and that was when Ethan started. Yes, Ariella agreed with her voice. Unusually soft it was. They stood in silence, processing the intimacy of what they'd shared. Finally, Ariella spoke. The ritual will be more intense than this. Some say it changes those who undergo it permanently. Are you warning me or yourself? She touched his face again, her massive hand gentle against his skin. Perhaps both of what we begin here cannot be undone well. Ethan said firmly, because I don't want to undo it. Their eyes met purple to brown, alien to humans, and something electric passed between them. The connection ritual loomed ahead, but in that moment both knew they'd already crossed a point of no return. Tomorrow, Ariella declared, we begin the final preparations. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of their shared future. Tomorrow, then, should I bring flowers? Her growling laugh filled the room. You are impossible, small warrior. Yet here you are. Yes. She agreed with her voice, rich with emotion. Here we are. As they parted for the night, both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The political opposition, the physical dangers, and the cultural barriers all seemed insignificant compared to the connection they'd forged. The fate of human-Valora relations might hang in the balance, but for Ethan and Ariella, something far more personal was at stake. They had found something. Neither species had thought possible a bridge across the vast gulf between their kinds, built not just of diplomatic necessity, but of genuine understanding and growing love. Ethan couldn't shake the sense that tonight had been different. The way Ariella's voice had softened her growling laughter, rich with emotion, had left an imprint on his thoughts. Yes, we're here, she had said, and the weight of those words settled over him like a blanket as the quiet hum of the lunar diplomatic station surrounded him. Ethan found himself standing at the window of his quarters, staring out at the pale glow of Earth on the horizon. He couldn't sleep, not with everything hanging so delicately in the balance. The fate of human-Valora relations was precarious, but it wasn't just the political alliances that troubled him. Now, what stirred deep in his chest was far more personal. Ariella. Her presence filled his mind even when she wasn't there. Her towering form, her sharp wit, the way her touch sent a shock through his skin, gentle yet powerful. He closed his eyes, exhaling what they were about to face. What they had to do would be nothing short of a battle for survival. Both the external threat and the emotional stakes between them loomed large. If anything tonight had shown him that their bond had become far more than a diplomatic experiment, it had grown into something real, something that neither of them could walk away from, not without leaving pieces of themselves. Behind his thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Grace and Ariella's deep, rumbling voice was unmistakable even through the barrier of the door. He could sense. The tension in her tone comes in, he called, turning toward the entrance. Ariella stepped into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. Even though she ducked slightly to fit through the humanized doorway, her presence filled the space. Her purple eyes were darker than usual, intense with the weight of what she had come to say. They've made their move, she said, her voice low but steady. The attack is happening tonight. We need to go now. Ethan's heart leapt in his chest, not from fear but from the urgency. In her words, he moved toward her, grabbing his jacket and sidearm, knowing instinctively that this was the moment. They had been waiting for the moment. Everything would unravel as soon as he reached her side. She placed her hand on his shoulder fingers, curling gently but firmly. Her grip was always so controlled, a testament to her power. We will not make it far if we stay here. She said we're being hunted. I figured, Ethan muttered, feeling the adrenaline spike through his veins. Do we have a plan? We run, she replied simply, but not only after we, high-ranking members of both factions, humans and Vora, see us as a threat. They won't stop until the connection ritual is destroyed until we're destroyed, Ethan's mind word. Then we have to complete it before they can reach us. Ariel's eyes flickered with something softer, and we completed it. She agreed. And for the first time there was a tenderness in her voice that hadn't been there before they moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors of the station. Their steps were almost silent. Despite the tension crackling in the air, every shadow in every corner could conceal an enemy. Now Ethan's mind was on high alert, scanning every movement, every flicker of light. But beside him, Ariella was a force of calm. She moved with the grace and precision of a warrior, her massive frame silent and lethal. As they made their way deeper into the station, it wasn't long before the alarms began to blare the red emergency lights, casting long-air shadows over the walls, heightening the tension between them. "We're running out of time," Ethan muttered, glancing up at her. Ariella nodded, her expression hardening, the maintenance tunnels too obvious. Ethan replied with his mind racing through alternatives. They'll be expecting that. What about the cargo holds? Zero gravity. It'll be harder for them to track you. As Ariella's lips twitched. In what almost looked like a smirk, most humanoids hate Zerog, most Vora too. Perhaps she admitted, but there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "But I trust you," Ethan blinked. Ariella wasn't one to throw those words around lightly. "Then let's move." They sprinted down the corridor. Hearing the echo of footsteps growing closer behind them, a distant plasma shot sizzled past Ethan's shoulder, and he cursed under his breath. "Allow me," Ariella growled, pausing only briefly to rip a section of wall, paneling free with one hand. She hurled it down the corridor, her strength sending the makeshift projectiles smashing into their pursuers. The delay bought them precious seconds, and they darted around the corner toward the cargo hold access. "Hope you like floating," Ethan muttered as he keyed in the access code. The doors slid open, revealing the expanse of the zero-gravity cargo chamber beyond. I do not know how Ariella responded, but there was no hesitation in her steps as they launched themselves into the weightless void. The sensation of floating through space was familiar to Ethan, but for Ariella, the experience was far more disorienting. Her massive frame, usually so graceful and poised, flailed slightly in the absence of gravity, and Ethan maneuvered toward her, steadying. Her gentle touches work with the emptiness. "Don't fight it," he murmured, his hands guiding her. She looked down at him, her purple eyes dark and intense. "I don't like feeling out of control," she admitted. Her voice was lower than usual. "Then trust me," Ethan said softly, locking his gaze with hers. "I won't let you fall." Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment something passed between them, something deeper than words. The connection they had been building for so long was starting to solidify. Even without the ritual, their pursuers hesitated at the entrance to the cargo hold exactly as Ethan had predicted. The zero-gravity environment threw off most humans, and it bought them the time they needed to glide deeper into a forest of floating containers. "Your species," Ariella said as they moved, "adapts remarkably well to adversity. We've had plenty of practice." Ethan replied with a faint smile. He sobbed quickly, though his eyes were scanning the area. "The real question is who's trying to kill us. Those weren't just mercenaries." "No," Ariella agreed, her voice filled with anger. "Some of them were Vora warriors from my own caste. They've joined forces with the humans who fear the connection." Ethan's jaw clenched. "They're afraid of what we might accomplish together." Before Ariella could answer, a new group of attackers appeared at the opposite end of the cargo hold, using magnetic boots to keep their balance. Ethan cursed under his breath, tugging Ariella behind a floating container. "We need to reach the emergency airlocks," he said, his voice tight. "If we can get to the outer hull, we might be able to slip away a sudden explosion that rocked the station, sending containers tumbling through the airless void." Ariella's arm shot out, pulling Ethan into her chest as a massive piece of debris hurtled past them. "You saved me again," Ethan gasped, his heart pounding against his ribs. "We protect what is precious to us," she replied, her voice filled with quiet intensity. Ethan's breath hitched the way she said it, the way her eyes locked onto his. It wasn't just a declaration of loyalty. It was something far deeper, far more personal, but there wasn't time to dwell on it now. They made their way through the chaos, using the debris for cover. But their pursuers were relentlessly growing bolder as they navigated the treacherous zero-gravity environment. Another explosion sent a fresh wave of debris flying, and the station's emergency lights began to flash life. Support is failing in sectors 12-15. The station's AI announced calmly that emergency protocols are engaged. They're trying to force us into a corner. Ethan realized his mind. Racing, they're cutting off sections of the station to trap us. Ariella's jaw tightened. Then we'll find another way out. They propelled themselves toward the nearest emergency airlock, but as they neared the hatch, another explosion shook the station, sending the massive door slamming shut. Ethan cursed under his breath, grabbing onto a nearby support beam to steady himself. We're running out of options, he muttered, and Ariella glanced around, her purple eyes narrowing as she took in their surroundings. There's only one choice left. Ethan turned to her, his brows furrowing. What do you mean? She reached out, cupping his face. In her massive hand, her touch impossibly gentle, the connection ritual. We complete it now. Ethan's heart skipped a beat here. Now there is no other choice. She said, her voice low and firm. We cannot wait any longer. The ritual is our only chance. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. The connection ritual wasn't just a diplomatic formality. It was something far more profound, something that would bind them together in ways neither of them could fully comprehend, and once it was done, there would be no going back. He looked up at her, searching her eyes for any sign of doubt, but there was none. Ariella was resolved, her gaze unwavering as she looked down at him. I'm ready, he said softly, his voice steady. Despite the whirlwind of emotion swirling inside him, Ariella's lips curled into a faint smile, her eyes softening. Then, let's begin. They found a small maintenance chamber, sealing the door behind them to buy themselves some time. The air was thin, and the emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow, making the space feel even more claustrophobic, but none of that mattered now. Ethan and Ariella were cross-legged on the floor, facing each other in the dim light. Her silver-scaled skin seemed to glow in the darkness, her purple eyes luminous as she reached for him. To my mind, she began, her voice a low, steady hum, your heart to my heart. Their fingers intertwined, and despite the vast difference in their sizes, the connection felt right. Ethan could feel the warmth of her skin and the pulse of her energy thrumming. Beneath the surface, your strength to my strength, he continued, his voice, barely more than a whisper, your soul to my soul. The connection between them deepened, and Ethan felt a sudden rush of emotions, fear, desire, longing. But they weren't just his emotions. They were hers as well, bleeding into his consciousness. Like watercolors blending. Together, he saw flashes of her memories, her childhood in the Valora home world, the weight of tradition and expectation pressing down on her shoulders. He saw the moment she first laid eyes on him. Her initial dismissal of him as weak and insignificant was followed by her growing fascination with his quiet strength, and in return she saw him as loneliness, his desire to bridge the gap between their species, and his growing attraction to her. Despite the vast differences between them, their minds twined together, their thoughts and feelings becoming one as they continued the ritual. The air in the chamber was growing thinner, but neither of them noticed they were too lost in each other or too consumed by the depth of their connection. Ariella Ethan whispered, his voice, a mix of awe and wonder. I never thought, nor did I, she replied in her voice, equally soft and equally filled with wonder. Their connection reached its peak, and in that moment something shifted. Ethan could feel the energy coursing through him, changing him at a fundamental level. He gasped his body, trembling as the transformation took hold. Ariella's eyes widened as she felt it too. Her massive frame shuddered as the energy flowed through her, reshaping her and altering her in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But even as their bodies changed, their connection remained stronger than ever before. They were no longer two separate beings. They were one when the door to the chamber began to give way, the sound of cutting tools echoing through the small space, but neither of them cared. They had transcended the physical world. Their minds and souls entwined in a way that could never be undone. The door to the chamber crashed open, but the attackers stopped in their tracks. They had expected to find two vulnerable beings caught in a desperate act. What they saw instead were two figures transformed beyond recognition. Ethan and Ariella stood side by side, their bodies shimmering with the energy of their completed connection, and their eyes, both now glowing with the same luminous purple hue, were fixed on their enemies. Unafraid and unshaken, Ariella's voice was the first to break the silence, carrying both power and joy. The connection is complete. Ethan's voice, steady and resonant, echoed her words, and what is joined cannot be broken. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons raised, but their courage faltered. It was clear that the two beings standing before them were no longer just human soldiers and Vora warriors. They had become something else entirely, something that transcended the physical and mental boundaries of their separate species. There was a new kind of power in their union, one that no weapon could break. The attackers began to retreat, confusion and fear spreading among their ranks. Ethan and Ariella did not pursue them. Instead, they simply stood there, united, knowing that their bond had already won the battle. As the last of the soldiers disappeared down the corridor, Ethan turned to Ariella. He could still feel the electric hum of their connection, a sensation so profound that it blurred the line between where his thoughts ended and hers began. He had never felt so complete, so whole. Ariella's massive hand reached out and gently touched his face. Her touch was no longer just an expression of care. It was a part of their very existence, an extension of the bond they now shared. "We are one," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I can feel everything, Ethan, every thought. Every emotion. You are within me and you are within me," Ethan replied, his voice filled with the same wonder. He could feel her strength pulsing through him. Her memories and desires are interwoven with his own. For the first time, he could truly understand the depth of her experiences, the weight of the expectations placed upon her as a Vora warrior, and the loneliness of standing apart from her people. He saw the world through her eyes and knew what it meant to be her. Their bodies still buzzed with the energy of the ritual, the transformation, not just spiritual but physical. Ethan could feel his senses heightened, his muscles more responsive, and his mind sharper than ever before. Ariel, too, seemed to move with a new grace, her once imposing form now carrying a lightness that hadn't been there before they had not merely connected. They had become a fusion of two beings, each enhancing the other in ways they could not have imagined. But it wasn't just about power. It was about trust, about love. Ariella stepped closer, her towering form bending down so that her face was level with his. "You truly are special," she whispered, her breath brushing against his skin. Her voice wasn't just in his ears. It echoed through his mind, a direct line into his soul. "I have searched for this all my life. Someone who would see me not just as a warrior, but as more like you were the one I was waiting for." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't fear, that it was desire, a desire that had been growing between them for so long, held back by duty and circumstance. Now, in this moment, there was nothing left to hold them apart. "You're strong, Ariella," Ethan said in his voice, low, intimate. His hands moved to her face, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers, the pulse of life that matched his own. "But your strength doesn't scare me. It's what draws me to you." Are Ariella's soft eyes and her massive hands enveloping his as she brought him closer. "You've changed me, little warrior," she murmured, her lips curving into a small, almost shy smile. "I didn't think I could feel this way about anyone." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "I'm not so little anymore, am I?" he teased, looking up into her glowing purple eyes. "No," she agreed, her voice filled with warmth. You are more than I ever expected." Their foreheads touched, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded away. The alarms, the chaos outside the chamber, the political tension, it all became irrelevant. All that mattered was this moment, this connection that bound them together so completely that they were no longer separate beings. The energy between them intensified, a heat rising from the core of their bond. It wasn't just a ritual that had brought them here. It was a growing affection, the desire that had simmered beneath the surface. For so long, the connection had stripped them of all barriers, leaving nothing but raw emotion, and they both felt it. Ariella's lips hovered near his, her breath warm against his skin. "Ethan." She whispered, her voice laced with vulnerability, something she rarely showed Ethan. Close the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and powerful. It was a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through together, every battle, every moment of doubt, every unspoken word. Their bodies moved in sync, guided not just by desire, but by the deeper connection. They now shared Ariella's arms wrapped around him, pulling him against her. Ethan could feel the rhythm of her heart beating in time with his. Their kiss deepened, and the bond between them pulsed with life, their thoughts and emotions merging even further. It wasn't just a physical act. It was a final step in their union, the ultimate expression of trust and love. "You are part of me now," Ariella whispered into his mind, her mental voice soft yet firm. "And I am part of you." Ethan's hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Their movements became more fluid. Their bodies were reacting to the shared sensations that flowed between them. Every touch, every breath was amplified by the connection, making every moment feel like an eternity. Ariella's hands, once so rigid and controlled, were now gentle as they explored the contours of his body. Her touch, both reverent and passionate, Ethan could feel her emotions surging through their bond. Her need, her desire, but also her love, a love so deep that it threatened to overwhelm him. He responded in kind, letting her feel his own emotions, the depth of his affection for her, the admiration and all that had grown since the moment they met their minds. Together, their thoughts intertwined in a way that made words unnecessary. They understood each other on a level that went beyond language and beyond physical touch. It was a union of souls, something far more profound than anything either of them had ever experienced. As the moments passed, the intensity of their bond only grew, their bodies now in perfect harmony, moving together as one, their movements reflecting not just a ritual, but the true intimacy that had been building between them. Ariella, who had once been cold and distant, was now warm and open, her body softening under his touch, and Ethan, who had always been so controlled and disciplined, found himself surrendering to the moment, letting go of everything except the sensation of being with her. "You've changed me," Ariella said again, but this time her voice was filled with wonder, as if she were still coming to terms with the transformation. "We've changed each other," Ethan replied, his voice hushed but steady, his hand sliding down to meet hers, their fingers intertwining. "Once again, this is more than just a ritual. This is us." Their connection reached a crescendo, the energy between them crackling like electricity. It was as if the entire universe had aligned, bringing them to this moment where nothing else mattered. But the two of them joined in a bond that could never be broken when the final wave of the connection washed over them. It was as if time itself had stopped. Ethan could feel his mind, expanding his consciousness, merging with Ariella's in a way that defied explanation. He could sense her memories, her thoughts, and her deepest desires, and she could feel the loneliness he had carried with him for so long, the longing to be more than just a soldier, to be seen, to be loved. And now they had found each other as their bodies stilled their breathing slow. Ethan looked into her eyes, his heart swelling with love. "We're different," now he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Ariella nodded, her hand coming up to cup his face. "Yes, we are more than we were before." Her fingers traced the lines of his jaw. Her touch is both intimate and tender. "Now we are truly one, The glow in their eyes began to fade, but the bond remained stronger than ever. They had completed the ritual, but the transformation was far from over. They were no longer just humans and Voras. They were something more, something new. A union of two souls that would never be undone came. Ariella said softly in her voice, laced with affection. It is time to return. As they stood, their bodies still buzzing with the energy of the connection. They knew that the world outside the chamber would be waiting for them, but they were no longer the same people who had entered this room. They were stronger now, united in the days that followed, and Ethan and Ariella became living proof of what was possible between their species. Their permanent bond, visible in their altered appearances and shared consciousness, sparked a revolution in human-Vora relations. Do you regret it? Ethan asked one evening as they stood watching Earth rise over the lunar horizon, their minds contentedly intertwined. Regretted becoming one with my impossible. Small warrior. Ariella's mental touch was full of warmth and humor. Never. I'm not so small anymore, he reminded her, though he still had to look up to meet her eyes. You were never small where it mattered, she replied, pulling him close. Your heart, your courage, your love. These were always giants. Their minds merged in the now familiar dance of shared consciousness, their bond, a testament to the power of love to transcend every barrier, physical, cultural, and even biological. They had become something new, something wonderful, and in doing so, they had opened the door for others to follow the lunar diplomatic station. Once a simple meeting point between species had become the birthplace of a new era, and at its heart stood Ethan and Ariella, forever changed, forever connected, forever in love. What now? Ethan asked, though their shared consciousness meant he already knew the answer now. Ariella smiled, her purple eyes matching his. We show others the way together. Their story became a legend among both species, the human soldier and the Vora warrior, who dared to connect and face death and transformation for love, and emerged as living proof that the greatest boundaries exist only in the mind. And as they stood together watching their two worlds orbit through space, their joined minds reached out to touch the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. They had become more than either of them had ever dreamed possible, and their journey was just beginning. The connection had changed them, but the love that had brought them to it remained their greatest transformation of all.